Madam President, a number of things have been said about the so-called stimulus package, which I feel, many of us feel, is more of a spending bill than a stimulus bill. But there's no doubt about the fact that it increases our national debt. And the debt is not some abstract thing. Our national debt's $10.7 trillion. This adds to the national debt as much money as, well, let's put it this way. It took from the beginning of the Republic until 1982 to come up to have a cumulative debt of $850 billion. And this is more than that. This is a lot of money. We're adding the 820 or 30 that we've heard about, plus the interest over the next 10 years. That adds about $10,000 to each family's share of the debt. With that $10,000, you could pay in-state tuition for a year and a half at the University of Tennessee. You could pay for 21 years of public school lunches every day for the average middle school student. You could buy a gallon of milk a week for 57 years. It's a lot of money. I'd like to make 3 points today as we think about this stimulus bill, which I believe is more of a spending bill. First, this bill makes a number of policy decisions on education, health, and energy that ought not to be made in such a bill, but ought to be separately debated and considered. Number two, we should have all the proposed spending on the table. Mr. Geithner is coming up to tell us how much we need for banks, then we need more for housing, then we need more for the war. I think if we knew all the money we're about to have to borrow, our appetite for spending $1.2 trillion mostly on projects that don't create jobs in the next few months would diminish. And third, this is not the kind of bipartisanship that I expected. As I listened to the President, I thought he wanted to change the way Washington works. And the way Washington works in a bipartisan way is for us to sit down and talk with one another and come up with something that both Republicans and Democrats agree on, not just we won the election, we'll write the bill, and let's see if we can pick off 2 or 3 senators. First, a number of policy decisions. The first version of the Senate bill actually doubled federal spending for education without any discussion. I used to be the Secretary of Education. Today, that department has about a $68 billion budget. This bill, the Senate version, doubles that. It took 40 years to get to $68 billion. It go double this year, double next year, I guess back down to 0 the next year, back down to 68. I don't know. But there was no discussion about this. Wouldn't you think that if we're going to double the federal commitment to education, we'd have a discussion about what would be best to spend it on? I mean, are we just so delighted with the performance in kindergarten through the 12th grade and our preschool programs that we have nothing to do but to say, let's just double the money for more of the same? And even the small things that have crept into the legislation, some of which President Obama has said he supports, and I have no doubt he doesn't. We have some new senators who've been at the forefront of that. We have a new Secretary of Education, for example, on the Teacher Incentive Fund to help reward outstanding teaching and outstanding school leading. Not a penny in the Senate bill. And what about charter schools? A lot of us on both sides of the aisle want to give teachers the freedom to use their own common sense and good judgment in dealing with the children that are brought to them. That's what a public charter school does. Not a penny. So that's the first thing. And then on health care. The House added nearly $90 billion for Medicaid. Well, that just sounds like a lot of money and just another program. But, Madam President, the President has said that we need to make health care available to every American. We Republicans agree with that, so we're ready to have a debate about it. That'll cost some money. And one of the major proposals, in fact, the one that has the most bipartisan support, the Wyden-Bennett legislation, would get rid of the Medicaid program and replace it with individual accounts. This preempts that decision, $90 billion more to the states. So the states get $90 billion. That's a lot of money. For Tennessee's share of that, probably be like $1.5 or $2 billion. It's going to make the program so rich the states won't want to give it up, and we won't be able to have a full discussion about health care when that comes around. And then an energy bill. Last year I asked the Energy Administration to estimate what kind of subsidies we were doing for renewable energy, because it seemed to me it was all going to wind and nothing else. I was about right. EIA said we're subsidizing wind at 27 times greater than all other forms of renewable energy per kilowatt hour. 53 times greater than subsidies for coal per kilowatt hour, 15 times greater than subsidies for nuclear, which produces 70% of our carbon-free electricity. That was in the middle of last year. Then that was at a time when we only were committed to $11 billion to give to rich people and big banks, some of which we're bailing out, who get big tax credits when they build wind turbines, whether or not the wind blows or not in the area where they are. So that was 11.5 in the middle of last year. Then we brought that up to $16 billion over the next 10 years at the end of last year in legislation. And this bill brings to $25.9 billion the amount of taxpayer dollars that we're paying rich people and banks so they can take big deductions for building wind turbines. Now, my view, as far as the beautiful mountains in North Carolina and Tennessee, I don't want those things littering all of our area, particularly because the wind doesn't blow there well enough to make it efficient. But even in areas where it does make good sense, and there are many parts of the country where it does, do we really need, without any discussion, to go from $11 billion last year to $26 billion this year with a national windmill policy? Why don't we have a debate about energy? And let's have a technology neutral way to encourage all forms of renewable energy, especially emerging forms of renewable energy. So we've got an education bill, a health care bill, and an energy bill, but we don't have a stimulus bill, Mr. President. Now, the second thing, we should have had all this on the table. Mr. Geithner has apparently delayed his recommendation about what we do about credit and banks until we've had to vote on this. This is supposed to be a transparent administration. To be transparent, let's put it all out there. How much do we need to appropriate for banks? I mean, I've voted for that twice now. I might vote for it again if I think we need to do it. It's not an easy vote, but I did it. How much do we need to spend on housing? How much do we need to spend on the war in Afghanistan and to finish the war in Iraq? How much do we need to spend on the health care plan that the President and we have said we want to work on? And then how are we going to shape all this into some control of entitlement spending? It would be nice if we had it all on the table if we knew that, as the testimony before the Budget Committee last week was, that we really need to appropriate $400 or $500 or $600 billion to take care of $2 trillion of toxic assets in banks to get our economy moving again. We might have less appetite for lumping an energy bill and an education bill and a health care bill and a lot of projects that don't really stimulate the economy in with this borrowed money. And finally, bipartisan. On this side of the aisle, just as on that side of the aisle, we like the new President of the United States. He was our colleague. He came to see us. We walked out of that meeting saying, here's an accomplished man who wants to help our country. We want him to succeed, because if he does, our country succeeds. But we wanted to be a part of it. We expected to be a part of it. I've said on the floor before, President Bush technically didn't need the Congress to wage the war in Iraq, so he didn't get support, for example, for the Iraq Study Group principles when Senator Salazar and I...
The senator has 1 minute.
Thank you very much. When Senator Salazar and I and 17 senators and 50 or 60 House members of both parties suggested it. So he could do it, but without that support, it made the war harder and it made the presidency less successful. This stimulus bill, Madam President, is the easy thing to do. But what the White House and the majority in the House and the majority in the Senate need to recognize is that if you want to be bipartisan, we want our ideas considered. And if you want 20 Republicans, you're probably going to lose 10 Democrats. That's the way things work around here. So we can either say, the majority can say, we won the election, we'll write the bill, and try to pick off 2 or 3 Republicans, or we can sit down together and make it work. We're ready to do that on this, but they won't have to do it probably. But when you get to banks, and when you get to housing, and when you get to entitlements and health care and the war, it's going to get harder. So I hope this is not an example of the kind of bipartisanship we're going to have. This is borrowed money. This is a spending bill, not a stimulus bill. And I regret that it would be better if all of the money we're going to be asked to spend were on the table.
The senator's time has expired.
I thank the chair, and if we all had the opportunity to see exactly what the total bill is before we vote on this part of it. I thank the chair, and I yield the floor.